Hey guys, LC Holt here, and this is my update for the week of November the 25th. It's time for Thanksgiving, and there's no better way of talking about Thanksgiving than talking about a serial killer like Richard Ramirez, otherwise known as the Night Stalker. Joining me today to talk about this. Oh, before I get into that though, I better plug my book. Don't want to forget that. Grim War. You want to see some serial killing? It's in this book right here. Collection of short stories available to me, Peekaboo, on Amazon. You can buy it in paperback and ebook form right now. So there you go. Now,
Grimoire, L.C. Holt.
That's right. C.W. Penney, you are the man. Thank you for joining me on this show. How are you doing up there in Newfoundland?
Good, man. We're doing good. Much like yourself, having a bit of rain today. Yeah. What can you do?
Is it cold, though?
It is cold. I think we're right around the corner away from getting a little bit of snow.
It was bitterly cold here last week, and I hate it. But now it's warming up. It's warming up. Rebecca.
It was like
Rebecca
70 degrees. It was like 70 degrees yesterday or something.
Yeah, and then it's raining. It was cold earlier, and now you know because you live nearer to me, Rebecca. Rebecca Ivey joining us as well.
Via satellite.
Via satellite, not from the moon this time, just from not far from where I am. So anyway, let's jump into this. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Born Ricardo Ramirez, watch out, Lucy, February 29th, 1960 in El Paso, Texas. He was the youngest of 5 children. The parents were Julian and Mercedes. Okay, Julian, his father, was at one time a police officer in Juarez, Mexico. So you know he saw the shit. And he brought the shit home with him because by the time he moved to America with his family and started working with the railroads, he was an abusive bastard. Lo and behold, Skype jumped in and had caused technical issues. There was a cutoff in the recording, so I'm going to fill you in. After I talked about Richard's father, I segued into the fact that he had a cousin named Miguel Ramirez. And so now we're going to rejoin the show as it was originally recorded and talk about some of the things Miguel brought back with him from Vietnam. And he had a quite extensive collection of Polaroid pictures. And these Polaroid pictures were of certain atrocities that he had committed when he was in Vietnam. Rape, murder, a decapitated head.
I was going to say, I remember hearing about the decapitated head.
Now, this is something that's kind of interesting because my father is of the age that he fought in Vietnam. And he said that when he brought back photographs, the army would go through the photographs and they would weed out the ones that would allow you to keep. And then they would keep the ones that they thought people shouldn't be seeing. So it makes me wonder if Miguel had these. I mean, it's kind of interesting because we're getting this story from Richard. So I think Richard, if this were a book, I'm not going to hold up my own book again just because I said book.
Now
if this
available on Amazon.
right.com, care of Richie Ramirez. If this were a book, he would be what I would consider an unreliable narrator. Now, I'm not saying that Miguel didn't have these photographs or something like it, but I know that the American government was very strict about the kind of photographs that could come back from Vietnam.
And he couldn't have, I mean, they were even more with mail as well. They'd go through the mail, and if there was anything, they would, like, get rid of that part of the letter or anything that was included.
Right, because Vietnam at that time was such there was such divisiveness about what was going on in our country and the way we were relating to what was going on over there. Now, I don't know. I'm just going to give it the benefit of the doubt, and I'm just going to say, okay, somehow Miguel managed to smuggle anally, perhaps, these Polaroids. And, so he had these Polaroids of all this horrible stuff that he did, including raping and decapitating young Vietnamese women. And he showed them to Richard, who was, as I said again, 12 years old, which it's a tough age when you have an abusive father. It's probably even tougher when you have a crazy fucking Green Beret cousin showing you this kind of stuff and teaching you how to kill people, because Miguel was clearly off balance. And perhaps he was one of these people who was a natural sociopath who just decided to go to war so that he could kill people and not go to jail for it. There are a certain percentage of people who get into wartime situations because of that sort of proclivity. And it sounds to me like Miguel had a lot going on in his brain probably before he went to Vietnam, because I don't think you just go to Vietnam and become a raging psychopath.
Yeah, no.
But anyway, Richie would, Richie, like I knew him. Unfortunately, I didn't. Richard used to go to Miguel's house to escape the anger of his father and the beatings of his father. He would also sometimes sleep in a cemetery, because he said a cemetery was a very peaceful place to be. I guess it is peaceful compared to, the house where the belt could come out at any moment. Now, Richard had a particularly interesting thing happen to him, and I say interesting not in a good way. He was present when his cousin Miguel fatally shot his own wife, whose name was Jessie, with a .38 caliber weapon during an argument. This was in May of 1973, so he was still fairly young. He was born in 1960. So that must be quite, I don't know. I mean, what would you guys think if you witnessed your cousin who you looked up to murder his own wife because he got mad at her? That's got to twist you in some sort of way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes,
just
one
a
would
little bit.
think.
Yeah. So he moved in with his sister. Like I said, there were a number of children. He had a sister named Ruth. And he didn't really escape the madness with Ruth, because Ruth's husband was apparently a peeping Tom. And he used to take Richie out peeping with him. And so all of a sudden, with all this violence and everything else, you're throwing in this voyeurism into the mix. So, yeah.
And it was about this time as well that he started getting into the LSD and became interested in Satanism.
As we do.
Yes, young teenager exploring life.
The Sunday norm, right?
Yeah, I remember when I went through my hardcore LSD Satanism phase. I'm only joking, because if I don't say that, people will actually think I did it. But anyway, even though Mike Miguel was found guilty of the wife's murder, he was actually released not long after because he was declared insane. And so instead of sending him to prison for shooting his wife in the face, go ahead, Beth.
I was going to say, back then, could they have gotten away with using, I went to war and it affected me? I mean, there was a certain point they didn't really accept that. PTSD wasn't accepted. And because I know, was it Audie Murphy was the one that really kind of fought for that to be recognized.
Yeah.
I got something I can interject here, actually, that a friend of ours here was talking on the phone last night, and her ex-husband used to pen pal Ramirez.
Oh, really?
Okay. And he used to get letters back, and this is fact, like he has the letters. And apparently Ramirez used to request like really weird shit from him. So he'd ask, like, even if it was just clips, cut stuff out and send it back to him. But he had an Asian foot fetish, apparently.
Richie did,
yeah. So I guess, does that stem from his cousin, uncle, Vietnamese war guy, corrupting and twisting his mind in any way?
I don't know, because some of his victims later, which we'll get to here shortly, were Asian.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how detailed he went in picking the victims. I mean, I think it was a little bit of a luck of the draw, which, like I said, we'll get to in more detail here momentarily. But I don't know. That's a good point. It could possibly have something to do with that. I know that, like, in 1977, it was just a couple years after he murdered his wife, Miguel got released, and Richie went back and started hanging out with him again.
Yeah.
So, this kid is just all kinds of twisted by this point. He's doing LSD. He's seen murder. He's seen apparently horrific photographs from the Vietnam War. And he's starting to mix this all with sexuality and voyeurism, thanks to the, pervert brother-in-law thing. But in high school, he took a job at a Holiday Inn. And this allowed him access to pass keys. And so he started to become a thief as well. He would use these pass keys, go into someone's room at night and steal from them while they slept. And one instance in particular is very interesting and I think very telling, because at one point he was caught with a man's wife. The guy walks in and Richard Ramirez had used his pass key to enter this room and attack this woman and was apparently intending to rape her. But the husband came in and just beat the ever-loving shit out of him, which, go husband. But the problem with that was no charges were really pressed because these people lived out of town. Go ahead,
And
Beth.
they didn't want to come back. They
Right.
refused.
Yes. And this is in the 70s. And we also have to remember that the idea of rape is not always, especially at that point.
Yeah.
Sometimes there can be a stigma involved, even though she wasn't actually raped. Unfortunately, that there is a stigma there that you don't necessarily want put on you. That might have had something to do with why they just said, okay, forget about it. We're getting out of here.
Yeah. And it wasn't really, that kind of thing really wasn't started to be talked about until the 80s.
Yes.
And even then it was a big stigma. I remember, there were some TV shows that like addressed it. It was kind of the topic of the week kind of thing. And, we need to start destigmatizing the victim. It's not the victim's fault. It's not.
Right. Removing the taboo from it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that if they had pressed charges that this would have changed anything that happened in the future. It might have delayed it, but it's worth noting. But he didn't stay in.
No, he after the attacks, he moves out to California.
Yes.
He drops out of school and he moves to California.
And that is where the first murder took place in 1984. Now, this particular murder I'm about to talk about is a murder that they did not know about at the time of his arrest, and actually did not know about for a long time throughout his incarceration. He murdered a 9-year-old girl named Mei Ling in the basement of a San Francisco hotel. He kidnapped this little girl. He raped her, he beat her, he stabbed her, and then he hung her from a pipe in the basement and made good his escape. Years later, in 2009, remember this happened in 1984, DNA from that crime was tied through the digital database to Richard Ramirez. And that's the only way we would have known that he committed the crime, because he never admitted to that. He never confessed to that, as much as he confessed to later, which does kind of make you wonder, how many other things has he not confessed to?
Yeah.
Because he started murdering when he was 24. And who's to say he didn't actually do other things before then he was trying to rape a woman when he was even younger than that. So who's to say he didn't do other things that have just never been tied to him and might never be tied to him? That's one of the unusual things. Now, the thing about Ramirez is he was kind of a braggart and very narcissistic. So he did admit to a lot of stuff, but he didn't admit to that one, which opens the possibility of maybe there being other things that he didn't admit to.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go into a list of some of his crimes that took place primarily in Los Angeles, because after he murdered the girl in San Francisco, he moved down to the LA area. Jenny Vinco was stabbed, nearly decapitated in her Los Angeles apartment. Now, she was 79 years old. This was June 28th of 1984. Luckily, an intruder had torn a screen off the window and climbed into her house and attacked her as she slept, which was Ramirez's MO. He liked to get the jump on people. He liked to prowl around at night, find a house he could break into relatively easily, and get in there. A fingerprint was actually left on the screen to this window. But the problem is that in 1984, fingerprinting was still on cards. They were working on getting a digital database. But in order to match fingerprints, you pretty much had to have a suspect and go, okay, this is the fingerprint from the crime. Let's match it to that guy's fingerprints. You had to have point of origin, in other words.
Yeah.
Or the only other way you could do it is to take this fingerprint from this crime of Jenny Vinco and start going through every card in the database manually, which just would have been impossible. I mean, there's just no way to do that. I mean, if you did that for every single crime that was committed, you would literally have no police on the street because they'd all be going through these fucking cards, right? But they were working on this database thing, and the database will come into play as being an important part of this story later on. But I tell you what, it wasn't long. It was about a year, and then Richard really hit the ground running with these murders. That was in June of '84. In March of 1985, March 17th, Rosemead, California, a really genuine murder spree began. I mean, once it started here, it just rolled and rolled until it reached its inevitable conclusion. This is an interesting case. Maria Hernandez, she was 22 years old. She was driving on the freeway. Well, Richard Ramirez, he was a car thief, and he had a car. And he was driving on the freeway, and he happened to spot this attractive girl. And so he decided he was going to follow her. So he tailed her from the freeway, picked totally at random, just saw her, and drove to her apartment, followed her up, to her house. And as she pulled into the garage, she had one of those electric garage door openers. He got out of his car at the curb and crept up. And as the garage door was coming down, he slipped under it. So this girl, Maria, she gets out of her car and she turns around, and there's this tall dude, dark hair, darkly complected, black wool cap, dressed all in black, standing behind her, holding a .22 caliber gun in her garage as the door continued to shut, which you can only imagine must be terrifying. So she still had her keys in her hand. She went up like this, with her keys in her hand and said, "Don't," and he shot her. But the bullet actually ricocheted off the keys in her hand and saved her life. She fell to the ground and pretended to be dead. And she felt him kind of walk over her and went into the apartment. Well, she lived with a roommate. And he went upstairs, and the roommate heard him coming. And she was in the kitchen. She hid down behind the kitchen bar. And she listened, and then when the footsteps stopped, she just sort of peeked up over the bar. And when she did, he was standing right there with the gun. He knew she was back there, and he shot her in the face and killed her. But Maria managed to get a good look at the guy, not only in the garage, but as he fled the house. Because, as I said, she survived from deflecting the bullet off her keys. And she was able to come up with a description of this guy with big bulging eyes. If you ever see the old artist rendering of Ramirez, these got these enormous, it almost looks like those gray aliens.
Like the little chihuahua eyes.
Yes,
right.
Like curly hair, eyes, and like a slit for a mouth. He's all eyes in these things. But it's not that far off because he did have this kind of intense stare, Now, an hour after this whole Hernandez thing, he pulled Veronica Yu out of her car. She was parked over in Monterey Park, and he shot her twice with the same .22 caliber revolver that he used to kill Maria Hernandez's roommate and tried to kill Maria Hernandez with. And so anyway, at least they had a description. And already, how the media does, they start to throw out names. It's like, let's see if we can name this guy. But it wasn't the Night Stalker at first. It was they called him the Valley Intruder, and another one called him the Walk-In Killer, because he just kind of walked into the garage, I guess. So already he's starting to get some publicity. Richie likes publicity. He doesn't know how much he's going to get coming up here, but already he's getting a taste for it. And as most serial killers do, he's kind of following his own press, which again comes into play later. Now, as I said, that was March 17th of '85. 10 days later in Whittier, California, at 2 a.m., Vincent Zazzara, who was 64, was shot while he slept with, can you guess, a .22 caliber weapon. Now, .22s are very unreliable guns, and they're also not necessarily killers. .22 is a very low caliber. So people have been known to put a gun to their head to commit suicide, pull the trigger, and not be killed by a .22. So sometimes Richard would shoot these people more than once in the head. But anyway, he bound Vincent's wife, Maxine, and he ransacked the house. Unfortunately, there was a shotgun under the bed that was unloaded. And Maxine Zazzara, while she was bound and Richard was searching through the house, got her hands and legs untied, went under the bed, grabbed the shotgun, and pointed it at Richard when he came back in. But as I said, it was unloaded. And I don't know if she pulled the trigger or if he knew that she was bluffing, but he shot her 3 times. And then what's worse than that is he gouged out her eyes and he put them in a jewelry box.
But they proved that was done after she had
died. Yeah, after she had been shot 3 times. Now, like the previous incident, they did manage to get some very valuable evidence from this. They got avia sneaker prints that were in the Zazzara's rose garden from the intruder. So now you have a, big bulgy-eyed artist rendering. You got the avia prints. You got the .22 caliber revolver, which is being used at all of these crimes. So already you're starting to tie this thing together, and you're getting some pieces of evidence. And also you got the fingerprint, which is pretty much useless unless you want to go through all those cards, but you do got it. Yeah. Now, a couple months later, in May of '85, Monterey Park again, there was a man named Bill Doy. And he was shot as he slept. He reached for his gun. He got shot. His wife was disabled. Lillian was her name. She was 56. Richard, sexually assaulted the disabled wife. She survived this, however. Her husband did not. He was shot and killed. He died later of his injuries from the .22 caliber bullet. Only a few days later, on May 29th of '85, in Monrovia, California, Richard had stolen a Mercedes-Benz, and he broke into the home of 2 elderly ladies. One was named Mabel Bell. They called her Ma Bell, and then the other one was Nettie Lang. They were both in their 80s, and he found a hammer in the kitchen. And Richard, being the brave man that he is, proceeded to beat 2 80-year-old women with a hammer. And he electrocuted Mabel with a cord that he put into the wall socket and cut. And so he wanted to torture her a bit.
Wasn't one an invalid as well? Wasn't the one that survived?
Yes, because one of them did survive this. Mabel died. Okay. Mabel, she died, but Nettie survived. Now, this was the first incident, too, of when he started to leave symbols drawn on walls and also on bodies, because he drew on Mabel's leg a pentagram. And he also drew pentagrams on the walls of the bedrooms. Now, these poor ladies, they weren't discovered until 2 days later. And they were comatose when they were found because, beaten with a hammer. And they were 80. It's amazing that either of them survived, lying there for 2 days in a comatose state. The next day, Richard wasn't really wasting any time. Over in Burbank, there was a lady named Carol Kyle. She was 42, and she was home with her 11-year-old son when Richard broke in. Now, Richard took the boy and shoved him in a closet, tied him up, shoved him in a closet, and he threw some handcuffs on Carol. And he told her, don't look at me while I'm doing this.
Oh, I know you're probably going to get to this, but there was one that he left because he thought Christ had saved her.
Yes, actually, the very next one we're going to talk about was a 16-year-old girl named Whitney Bennett. This was in Sierra Madre, also obviously in California. He beat her while she slept with a tire iron. And what you're talking about is he took a phone cord, and it was obviously still plugged in, and he tied it around her neck and was going to strangle her with it. Well, I guess the cord was frayed or something, and the sparks started to fly off of it. And he interpreted this as being a sign from God that Christ was saving this young girl. And Richard is all tied up in this whole, quasi-religious thing. He believes in God, the devil. He's worshiping Satan, supposedly. But, and he thinks maybe they're both the same being. He has this whole sort of mythology going on in his head. So yes, apparently he left Whitney alive after beating her with a tire iron, because he thought that these sparks that shot off the cord were Jesus saving her.
It was a sign.
It was a sign, yeah. So again, there's another one left alive. I mean, these poor people are being assaulted in the worst way. They're being sexually assaulted and raped in their homes. So they're certainly not unscathed, but they are, a few of them surviving, at least with their lives. That was on July 5th, a couple days later in Monterey Park. He seemed to always go back to Monterey Park. Mm-hmm. He had a thing for Monterey Park.
You would think they would have more cops patrolling the area by this time.
No kidding. I mean, you got this guy driving around a stolen car. He's prowling around neighborhoods, picking houses at random. So he's just walking around in the dark.
Yeah.
And granted, he's wearing all black, but, there's a weird-looking guy walking around neighborhoods where people were murdered.
With big eyes.
Huge eyes. Like one of those.
Owl eyes.
I know, just these eyes that are that big,
It's like,
they're like
Puss in Boots eyes.
So, I mean, obviously the officers aren't going through the fingerprint cards, so put him on patrol, right? If he's hitting the same place.
Watch out for enormous glaring eyes. They'll probably catch in the headlights of your cruiser. Well, apparently, they didn't do so well over in Monterey Park. I'm not trying to put you guys down, but this Joyce Nelson, who was 61, she was beaten to death while she slept on her living room couch. Okay. And then, if that wasn't enough, the same night, July 7th, he goes over to Sophie Dickman's house. She was 63. He tended to like to pick on people who are either, much older or, alone, like teenage girls in their houses. He assaulted and raped her.
Yeah, and I've noticed if there is a couple, he'll shoot the guy first and then.
Yes. Yeah, he's not really interested in the guy. He wants to remove them from the situation pretty quickly.
Probably because that husband beat the crap out of him that time.
Right. He's like, I remember the Holiday Inn. I'm not doing this again. Now, this was the first time that they got another piece of, of this puzzle, because he asked Sophie Dickman, he said, I want you to swear to Satan that you're not hiding any valuables from me. And I'm sure she was like, I swear to Satan and whoever else, just leave me alone. But he did leave. He left her alive and he took her valuables, because robbery is also a big part of this. So, if this were connect the dots, you can see dots starting to be connected, from the pentagrams to the swear to Satan to the bulging eyes to everything else. It still didn't slow him down, though.
And I guess the pawn shops weren't on the lookout for bulging eyes either.
He was fencing these things. It's amazing. I mean, you must imagine he's going to some of the same places, right?
Yeah. And they're wow, you brought a big haul the day after another murder and robbery took place.
Right. And these are coming in such quick succession. I mean, how many have I talked about? And we've only gone from March to July of the same year. I mean, this is the same summer all of this is going on. He took a little bit of a break, because the last one I was telling you about, the double case, was on July 7th. July 20th, he went over to Glendale and he stole a Toyota because, why not? And he bought a machete. Stole the Toyota, but bought a machete. Tell me how that makes any sense.
Well, he had some money from the pawn shop,
I guess so. And there was this lady named Leela. She was 66, and her husband, he attacked them, can you guess, in their beds, and he robbed their stuff. And the same night, he went over and he fenced the stuff. Speaking of pawn shops, he fenced their stuff, and he got some money out of that. And he was like, I'm not done yet. At 4 a.m. the next morning, he beat and raped another woman, and after he killed her sleeping husband and robbed their house. He left the wife alive. They had an 8-year-old boy again, and the wife and the little boy were left alive yet again. Richard didn't seem to be very interested in murdering little boys. He certainly had no problem murdering little girls.
Yeah.
Maybe this was some sort of a psychological thing, or maybe I'm looking too deeply into Richard. Maybe he's just crazy with a capital K. and he's just doing this completely at random. But it is, I guess, worth noting that twice a mother and a little boy were left alive in these situations. So a few days later, August 6th, Northridge, there was this younger couple. For the first time, really, he attacked a younger couple. They were in their 20s. Obviously, he attacked younger single victims. But Chris and Virginia Peterson were attacked in their bed. And Ramirez shot Chris. But Chris was like, oh, fuck this. And he came up out of that bed and he dodged 3 bullets. And he went after Ramirez. And Ramirez was like, oh, shit, no, fighting back. And he runs away like a little bitch. And Chris and Virginia survive. Chris was shot once, but he, surgery managed to take the bullet out. Again, this was a 22. But Richard got scared off of that situation. And I just want to say, Chris, here's to you, man. Let's raise a glass to Chris.
Right there.
Rebecca's like, I don't have a glass. I'll just nod.
I don't. I just nod. I didn't pack a glass over here.
Now, if only Chris had beaten the shit out of him, we might have saved a few other people along the way. But, Richard was following media coverage. And by this point, they had given him a name, which was the Night Stalker. Mm-hmm. He started to get a little weary of this whole LA scene, because he's committed, as you can tell, quite a lot of murders, quite a lot of sexual assaults, burglaries. So he decided
hit every house in town by now.
Monterey Park, there's not a house he hasn't hit at that point. And I guess maybe he's starting to get worried about fencing some of these. But then again, I think about when living in LA and all the mini pawn shops there are. And if I walked in with stolen goods, would they really care?
No, they wouldn't. It's probably most there.
Yeah, they're like, ooh, some more. Great. But anyway, regardless of the reason, he left LA. He went back up to San Francisco, where they wear flowers in their hair. And on August the 18th, he attacked Peter and Barbara Penn as they slept. And in this particular case, he wrote another thing on the wall using lipstick. Not a pentagram this time. He wrote Jack the Knife on the wall. Not to be confused with Mac the Knife. Oh, Mackie is back in town. Now, the mayor of San Francisco, Dianne Feinstein, made a big blunder.
Oh, yes. And everyone was just,
yeah,
she announced what the evidence was so he could get rid of the shoes. She announced what he was wearing so he could drop them off the bridge or whatever.
He dropped them off the Golden Gate Bridge after Mayor Feinstein. The police in Los Angeles and San Francisco got together on this case of Peter and Barbara Penn, and they were talking. I just realized Peter Pan. I was just saying that, and I realized it. They got together on this, and they decided that, hey, we have some similar evidence. And so the mayor's like, oh, you got similar evidence? Let me tell the world. And she did. And as Rebecca said, off the Golden Gate Bridge, those avias went.
And Richie was, thanks for the heads up.
And I'm sure the detectives gave her a good talking to, I guess you could say.
They gave
choice words were said to her.
They gave Dianne a good old-fashioned tongue lashing.
That's right.
That
the
was
phone books out.
Yeah. The good old days. So August the 24th, not long after that happened, he tried to break into the house of a guy named James Romero Jr. Now, James Romero had a son who was James III, and Jimmy III was laying in bed, and he heard footsteps outside his house. And he's like, what's this? So he gets up, and he turns on the lights, and Richard gets spooked because he's been detected before he's gotten into the house. So Richard hightails it over. He stole another Toyota. And it's weird
he
because
loves Toyotas. They're very reliable cars.
They are, yeah. And, he stole the Mercedes-Benz. Remember when we were talking about that? And he went from the Benz straight down to 2 Toyotas. He's like,
Telling
these
you, Toyotas last.
no. He's like, I want
It's an
good
Asian
gas
import
mileage.
car.
That's true.
It's an Asian import car. He had a thing for Asians.
Oh, good point. Wow, this is all tying together now. But I was going to say about this Toyota, the reason I was pointing out this one is because James Romero Jr., he looked out the window and saw Richie get into this Toyota, and he jotted down not only a description, but he jotted down a partial license plate on this Toyota. And I should probably say that this is back in Los Angeles now, the Romero case, because he came back after the San Francisco debacle where the mayor gave him a tip and he threw the evidence away. He's come back now to Los Angeles. Later that night, the same night as the Romero case, he broke into the house of a guy named Bill Carnes, who was 30 years old, and he shot Bill Carnes 3 times in the head. And then he raped his fiancee, Inez Erickson, who was 29. Now, Bill Carnes, he survived this ordeal, being shot in the head 3 times. He was, I believe, a software designer. And it ruined his career, and it gave him many problems in terms of, disabilities, later in his life. But he survived with a lot of cognitive function. Inez, his fiancee, also survived. But she heard Ramirez say, again, when he was searching the house, looking for valuables, Richard said, well, look, are you hiding anything from me? Swear to Satan you're not hiding anything from me. So again, this swear to Satan thing comes back. It's another interesting, very specific clue that helps to tie a lot of these things together. Because how many home invasion people are out there raping you and then asking you to swear to Satan? So the problem is for Richie now is he's got this Toyota and he needs to dump it. So August 28th or thereabouts, he dumps this Toyota and it's found. Richie was pretty diligent about wiping down the vehicle, trying to eliminate fingerprints, but he missed the rear view because he left some very good fingerprints there on the rear view. Now, what's happened over the few years that this has been going on, a couple years, is that this database of fingerprints has been basically has come to fruition. So now you have a database. You have a fingerprint left on a car seen at a crime scene or fleeing from a crime scene. You know that this is the Night Stalker. Most likely you have his thumbprint on the rear view. They run this thumbprint, and what they discover is that it belongs to a car thief and a man who has been arrested several times for drug offenses named Richard Ramirez. So now
he's got a rap sheet.
He's got him a rap sheet. He's been doing a lot of stuff. In fact, during some of these crimes, he was in jail. Like they had the Night Stalker a couple times. They just didn't know it was the Night Stalker. And of course, he's not going to tell anybody because he's not that stupid. But anyway, the police go on the local news and they say, we know who you are. And pretty soon everyone else will. And the net is closing in on you, basically.
Yeah, but he didn't know they were looking for him, correct? Because he was on a bus to Tucson to visit his brother.
That's right.
Gets there, was it August 30th? And then I guess he doesn't meet up with his brother because he comes back on the 31st. And when he arrives at the bus station, of course, the police are there thinking, oh, we're going to, look at this thing, make sure he's not trying to escape. But he's coming back, and that's how they spot him. Correct.
Yes. Yeah, that was the big thing. Well, this was one of the things was, when he left, all this stuff was going on in California news on television. This was kind of pre, everything is going live everywhere around the world. In California, everybody has seen Richard Ramirez's face if you've turned on the TV and seen these mugshots. Richard's in Arizona, as you said, trying to visit a brother that's not home. So he comes back and he doesn't realize, having been in Arizona, that his face has been splashed everywhere. And it's interesting because he actually walks past police officers at the bus station because the police officers were looking for people leaving. They weren't looking for people coming back. So he got a little bit of an advantage there. He walked right out of the bus station. Shortly thereafter, looked at the newspaper and saw his face on the newspaper as the Night Stalker, which I'm sure must have been a sinking feeling for him.
Yeah.
And then there are
My
these.
favorite part of the story.
This is a great part of the story. I'm going to relish the telling. So Richard sees his face on the front page of the newspaper, and these ladies look up and they see him and they say, El Matador, and point at him. And that means, in Spanish, the killer. They're saying, there's the killer right there. And so Richard freaks out and he starts to run, and he just takes off on foot. And he gets onto the freeway on foot and tries to carjack somebody on the freeway, which if you've ever been on foot on the California freeway in Los Angeles, it's probably a little difficult to carjack someone because they're going really fast. He tries to do it, but can't really get anybody on the freeway. So he hops off the freeway, starts running toward East LA, which, a mistake number 2.
Yeah.
He starts to try and get into several cars. Twice he tried to carjack somebody and was thwarted. And then all these people are seeing him, and they're like, hey, that guy, that's the guy. And so people in the neighborhood start to run after Ramirez. And Ramirez is like, oh, feet don't fail me now. He's running like crazy trying to get away from.
I bet you wish he hadn't thrown those sneakers off the bridge then.
I know. He's like, these shoes here are nothing compared to my Avias. And he's running, he's running through the East LA, and he's trying to get away from these people. And these people are throwing rocks at him. They're trying to trip him. They're probably shooting him with water hoses. It's like he's running through American Gladiators trying to get away. And they catch his ass. They catch his ass, and they take a metal bar and they start beating the ever-loving shit out of him. I love saying that, if you noticed, especially when it comes to Richard. I like to emphasize that they beat the ever-loving shit out of him.
They just kept beating him till the cops got there.
The cops saved him.
Yeah, they should have just been like, save some taxpayer money, let them finish him off.
I know. Well, if it was a perfect world, the cops would have just like, I don't know that address. I need donuts. I'm out of coffee. But
I'm out of coffee.
We're putting the fingerprint database together. That's what's going on. We can't get there,
Right. It's like, pardon me, I have some cards to go through. And but anyway, the cops do arrive and they save Ricardo from the angry townsfolk. You just imagine it's like Frankenstein, at the end where they're coming to torture.
Or I was thinking like a very vigilante Little House on the Prairie. You remember how at the end it was like all of this vigilante against Nellie. She's been a turd the whole episode, and they all come after her on the playground.
Yeah, and just imagine her with big eyes.
Yeah, big eyes.
Huge eyes. Curly
Looking
hair.
for her sneakers.
That's right. But so
we enjoyed
anyway,
that a little too much.
that was how Richard Ramirez found his way into the arms of the law. And he pretty quickly started into the not so loving arms of the law. I'm sure they pulled out a couple phone books on it.
Yeah.
But actually they probably didn't have to, because he wanted to confess. He was very eager to confess because he was very proud.
I was going to say, he probably didn't want to get let out back on the streets where the public would throw rocks at him again.
That's right. I'll confess to anything. I was Jack the Ripper. That Zodiac guy? That was me too. Don't let me near East LA.
He wasn't Jack the Ripper. He was Jack the Knife.
Yes, Jack the Knife.
Mac the Knife.
Mac the Knife.
Yep. Bobby Darin. I'm Bobby Darin. But anyway, so they have him in custody and he confesses. And this leads into this really interesting situation I'll tell you about. This is kind of an aside, but it is kind of funny to me. There's an actor named Sean Penn. I'm sure you guys have probably heard of him.
Yes. At the time, he's probably married to Madonna still, right?
Yeah, and he was smacking around extras. And one of these instances when he smacked around an extra on a film set, he got sent to the county jail where Richard Ramirez was being held. And Ramirez found out that Sean Penn was like 3 cells down. And he's like, pass a note. He's like, hey, pass this note down to Sean Penn. I want his autograph. And so he passes the note down asking for Sean Penn's autograph. And Sean Penn, he writes on this note the most amazing thing. He writes, "Dear Richard, it's impossible to be incarcerated and not feel a kinship with your fellow inmates. Well, Richard, I've done the impossible. I feel absolutely no kinship with you. Signed, Sean Penn." So that was, I think, a very interesting aside. But I guess he did get his autograph because Sean signed it.
Did Sean ever go back to prison after that?
No,
or was he like, I don't know if I want to do this again?
Right, I'm a little too close to crazy people. Now, I wanted to take a little bit of time here because this is a whole circus in and of itself. But there was a trial that went on for years. It was the most expensive trial in California history. Get this. It was
until the OJ trial.
It was actually more expensive.
It was.
Can you believe that? It was more expensive than the OJ Simpson trial.
Wow.
It was a media circus. And at first, Richard, I think, really didn't like it. But then he came, as you do over the course of several years, became quite accustomed to the attention he was getting. There's a really famous bit of footage from his arraignment where he came into the courtroom and he had painted or drawn a pentagram on the palm of his left hand and, held it up so that everyone could see the pentagram on his hand. And as they let him out, he said, "Hail Satan." Well, that was sort of a precursor to the circus that was about to play out in the Los Angeles courtroom. He liked to wear like suits. And he had, over time, he had kind of short hair to begin with. He grew this like long black mane, this sort of like bouffant Golden Girls. It was very 80s kind of hairstyle. He sort of looked like Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse. And he wore the big sunglasses and the nice suits. And, and then this thing started to happen. This trial began on July 22nd of 1988. The trial began. Now, keep in mind, he was arrested a long time ago, but there's a lot of process that you go through in the California court systems. He had these 2 brothers who were his attorneys named the Hernandez brothers. They had no idea what they were doing, and they made a debacle of this whole thing. And I don't think Richard really cared because he was soaking in all this adoration from.
Yeah, because he had like a fan club.
He did. He had groupies showing up in the courtroom. And he would turn around and wink at him and wave at him and smile at him. And I just have to wonder, maybe you guys can help me with this. What's up with this fucking groupie thing?
I don't like go be a groupie to like someone who's successful.
Yeah, like what happened to Paul McCartney?
No.
Paul McCartney is not going to rape and murder you and cut out your eyes.
Maybe they just had to draw a line with the Say, Say, Say song.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I mean, you could at least do Ringo.
I know.
Anyone would be. Sean Penn
was around at the time.
Sean Penn. Anyone other than
Yeah.
Richie.
I mean, Sean Penn might smack you around, but he's probably not going to murder you. Well, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, Richard had all these groupies, and it's very strange because, at least for me, I wonder,
What's wrong with someone that does?
Well, what I wonder is this. I wonder, like, ladies, let me just tell you something. If you lived in Monterey Park and you had an easily accessible house, he would come in there and he would rape and murder you. You would be a victim. So I don't get it. And plus his teeth are rotting and he has bad breath.
Oh, and big eyes.
Huge eyes.
He looks like a meth owl.
Yes,
meth owl.
Meth. An owl on meth.
That's right. He's like, hoo, hell, Satan. It's insane. I don't understand it. I wasn't really expecting you guys to help me.
It's a great world out there. There are plenty of fish to choose from. There's not a man shortage on this craft.
He was pretty charismatic, though. And he was a narcissist, and a lot of people, it could go both ways, men and women, find that an attractive trait.
Do you think that he was? Do you think that he was an attractive man?
I
No.
don't know.
Well, I
No.
hope you didn't, CW.
No, I don't have any issue telling another guy if he's a good-looking guy. I mean, I'm comfortable enough with myself, but looking at Richard Ramirez, I don't see an attractive-looking guy.
Yeah.
No, I mean, he was not attractive, but even if he had been attractive, those teeth. And also, and not only that, but I mean, obviously the crimes, I'm not going to be like,
Yes.
oh, he's so charismatic, but he's a cuckoo bird.
Exactly.
He is a cuckoo bird. And if you're like, yeah, that's okay, you are a cuckoo bird.
Yeah.
Well, there were some other kind of odd things that happened. There was actually a juror on this case who was murdered. A lady who was a part of the jury. They thought maybe Ramirez had something to do with it, because at one point Ramirez had threatened that he was going to somehow get a gun in the courtroom and shoot the cops or shoot the judge or something.
Prosecutor.
The prosecutor, that's what it was. And so they had to put a metal detector in the courtroom to make sure no one was like smuggling guns in and like going to do some sort of John Wick move and throw it to him and something, and he would shoot the prosecutor. That, of course, never happened. But people, when this juror died, they thought that, what, did he have something to do with that? Does he have a cult that he's arranging things outside? But come to find out, it was just a jealous boyfriend. It was just a really weird thing. But I know that the alternate juror who took her place, like, didn't want to go home at night and stuff for a while, which I can't really say I blame them.
I mean, in those kind of situations, like the alternate or the other jurors, I mean, is that a situation where you can go, I can't do this. I can't do this.
Can you opt out?
Yeah, can you opt out at that point if you feel like you're in danger?
That's a good question. I don't know. That would be something.
I don't know either.
That would be something, if anybody out there knows, let us know, because I would like to know if you could just say, hey, this shit's too weird for me, guys. Peace out.
Yeah,
right.
Particularly before they found out it was the boyfriend. I mean, I don't know what the turnaround on finding out it was him was, but
yeah,
but I mean, in those moments where they're going, holy crap, it's possibly him.
Yeah.
How was that handled?
I don't know. That would be interesting to know. I should say that they finally, after all this time, and the Hernandez brothers, and trying to put a case together. I think one of the brothers was nearing a stroke at one point and wasn't even in the courtroom a lot. This was the basis of a lot of Ramirez's appeals, by the way, were these Hernandez brothers, because he said he didn't get a fair shake. But at the same time, he chose the Hernandez brothers, and he stuck with them the entire time, because this was a long trial, because it was like over a year before they reached a verdict. This trial went on forever. He was found guilty on all charges: 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. And November 7th, he was sentenced to death. 19 times they were going to kill him in the gas chamber.
Right.
Now he did have a girlfriend at this point.
Yeah. Well, before we get into that, I wanted to just say one thing. CW had some interesting information for us, because they did some tests on Richard, and I do want to talk about the girlfriend and ultimate wife. But CW, do you want to share this some of this, what they found out about Richie via these tests?
Yeah, sure. They actually ran what was known as a Hare's Psychopathy Checklist, PCLR. It was revised a couple of years ago. Anyway, Ramirez scored a 31 out of 40 on that test, which makes him a primary psychopath. However, despite the score, it could be possible Ramirez meets the criteria as a malignant narcissist or sociopath. So,
well, what is this test?
It was a test compiled by Dr. Hare back in the 1970s, Dr. Robert Hare. The PCLR is the name of it. He was a Canadian professor and researcher renowned in criminal psychology, actually.
CW's like, represent
Canada, right? Yeah, so actually this is the gentleman right here. That's the man that created the test.
Okay. What are some of the questions?
Actually, it's a 20-item symptom rating scale that allows qualified examiners to compare subjects on a degree of sociopath, psychopath, or prototypical psychopath. Every score is given on a base of 0, 1, or 2, sorry. Some of them are like they start off. The first one here is glib or superficial charm.
Well, that's him.
Oh yeah, right. Need for stimulation, not so much in his. You know, that's more to me. I'm almost like a Albert Fish type situation there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he was a rapist.
Well, okay, yeah. There we go. Pathological lying, manipulativeness, lack of remorse or guilt, shallow affect was one of them.
We should be taking this test. Like, we should all three be taking this test, as you call it out.
Yeah, actually, for the folks watching and both of you guys, you can actually go on Google and do this test yourself
and find out just how much of a psychopath you are.
Yes.
Awesome.
You can do this on the web. So yeah, parasitic lifestyle is another one.
That would be him.
Yep. Sexual promiscuity, early behavior problems, lack of realistic long-term goals, failure to accept responsibility for own actions. Like it just goes on. Juvenile delinquency. You know, that had to play some kind of effect there. Criminal versatility. It just went on. A prototypical sociopath would receive a maximum score of 40, while someone with no absolute psychological traits or zero tendencies would receive a 0 score. A score
they have tested multiple people, serial killers, on this, I assume.
Oh yeah, the list is extensive. A score of 30 or above qualifies a person for a diagnosis as a psychopath. People with no criminal backgrounds normally score around 5. And many non-psychopath criminal offenders score around 22.
Interesting. So who are some of the other serial killers we would know that were given this test?
Well, Mr. Charlie Manson scored a 31 out of 40.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, right. Ramirez was a 31 out of 40. Jeffrey Dahmer, this is what floors me, scored a 22 out of 40.
Well, I think that might be because Dahmer had, he clearly knew right from wrong. Dahmer.
He did.
You know, that might have had something to do with it, because I don't know that Ramirez had such a distinction.
No, and Dahmer did have that remorse aspect. He felt bad about killing people. He didn't enjoy it. So
yeah, and Manson was just such a narcissist that I don't think he ever thought he did anything wrong.
Yeah, John Wayne Gacy scored a 28. Canadian serial killer duo Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, if you're familiar with the individuals. Bernardo scored a 35 out of 40. Homolka only scored a 5 out of 40.
Wow, that's pretty low.
Yeah,
that would be go ahead.
Oh, go. No, you can go ahead.
I was going to say that would be about Rebecca. She would be about a 4, I think.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
And Ted Bundy almost topped the charts. Ted Bundy actually scored a 39 out of 40.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
No. And then there was a gentleman on Channel 4's. Now this is American TV. Channel 4's 2000 documentary film called Psychopath. They would not release his actual name. He was just given the name Wayne, and he scored a 40 out of 40.
I think I know this Wayne. I think I met him at a convention, at least once. Yeah. No, but that's real interesting. That's interesting, and yeah, he is clearly a psychopath. I think it's quite possible he could have been a sociopath. I'm not sure. I'm not sure with Ramirez. It's a hard one to say. I know that regardless, there were these women that, like what Rebecca was saying earlier, there was a lady named Doreen Leroy, and she married. She wrote him 75 letters and then wound up marrying this psycho. this high
Did she
score.
say that when he was going to be put to death, that she was going to kill herself?
That's what she said.
But
But
then
she
they didn't end up together in the end. They split.
they split, which is interesting to know. Like, how do you split with someone who's already in San Quentin? Like, do you just like
Yeah.
stop visiting? You just stop visiting or something?
Yeah.
Did they recommend couples counseling?
There's a great photograph of this lady and Ramirez on the wedding day, and I think the lady had a grown son because he's pictured with them. So you have it's hilarious if you can find it. You have Richard Ramirez and his new wife, and then next to them, standing there like a deer caught in headlights, probably thinking, "Mother, what have you gotten me into?" Is her son.
Yeah.
I mean, at least he showed up. I mean, hey.
He did. He looked
Most of
miserable
them-
as hell.
Yeah, most kids would be like, I gotta work that day.
Well, he was probably just trying to keep Richard's hands out from around his mother's throat.
That's true.
Because again, yeah, go ahead.
On the PCLR testing, actually a little later down the road, after he got what was it, the 31 out of the 40 scale, they deemed that it was highly possible that he also suffered from schizophrenia.
Huh.
But he wasn't diagnosed.
Well, that I think I could see that even more, actually, because a lot of these people who would get letters from him, they would write to him and stuff. He would send these like people letters back, and mostly they were women, but he would write back to guys too. And Ramirez's letters, if you've ever read any of them, there are numerous ones on the internet, were very weird in so much as it was basically a series of random biographical factoids about himself with questions. Like, for instance, he would say, "I once knew a girl named Susan. She could do handstands. So do you like text messaging? Can you send me a picture? I once knew a guy with size 4 shoe." I mean, it was just like weird things, and it was all kind of disjointed, completely impersonal. You just imagine him sitting in his death row cell writing these letters and just sending them off to people. And the people would send him photographs of themselves. Like, he would ask guys to send photos of their girlfriends to him. And I guess sometimes people would. There was a lady that I saw who sent her home phone number to him, and he used to call her collect every morning until eventually she was like, "This is too expensive," and she just stopped, accepting the calls.
Yeah.
I just don't understand that. And I think I never will.
He actually, earlier I mentioned a friend of ours, her ex-husband was writing him.
Yeah.
He sent that individual a hand-drawn Christmas card, apparently, and it was Santa in a sleigh with the reindeer, but Santa was a skeleton and the reindeer were like rotting and zombied. Like,
oh, nothing
right.
like good old Richard Christmas cheer.
Right?
Well, Richard will not be celebrating with us this year because way back in 2013, he died of B-cell lymphoma, which is basically blood cancer. He never was executed. He was on death row for 23 years. And as the appeals process works in California, you can be on death row for the rest of your life. Just because you're sentenced to death in California doesn't mean you're going to be executed in the gas chamber.
No.
Which he wasn't, but he did die, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. As he said, death always came with the territory. So now he's gone that route.
I do have a question. You said that they linked the 9-year-old girl's murder to him. Was that before he died? After he died? Was he ever, put on trial for that? Or did he die before all that was able to come to fruition?
They never put him on trial for it because he was already on death row, but he was alive. That was discovered in 2009, and he died a few years later.
Okay.
But yeah, he was alive when that came to pass. But anyway, we're about out of time, guys. Richard Ramirez, what an interesting show. Another serial killer covered. I hope you all enjoyed the show. I know we try to make it as light as possible, dealing with these grisly things. But before we head out, I want to talk for a moment about my guests today. CW, you have your own channel. We want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. I've had to step away from it for a little bit, but I'm getting back into the swing of it. On YouTube, Carl's Creep Show. I also do one with a good friend of mine, Bradley Lynch, Rant and Raven Reviews, which you were our first guest on.
I was.
And that was an awesome time. We are going to have you back. We're actually trying to be looking now to get one lined up fairly soon with Mr. George Romero.
Yes.
Yes.
That'll be fun.
That will be a very fun one to discuss his father's work and impact in the industry. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And Rebecca, what do you got on the go?
Well, I have a music channel. You can find me under Rebecca Ivey. I've got a couple of videos, and I've got a vlog as well where I talk about like health and lifestyle stuff, which Collins has been on there, and I'm gonna maybe try to wrangle him back on there again. Make him my food guinea pig.
Well, I love doing all these things. That's a lot of fun for me. Not only this show, but everyone else's show too, because I'd love to see my face on screen. No, I'm just kidding. But I'll tell you something I do.
He is a 30 on the test.
So he rates a 3 on the narcissist scale?
She's a 4 and I'm a 30. So anyway, but speaking of other things I like to see on screen, there's my book.
Yes.
Grim Grimoire, now available to buy Amazon, paperback and in ebook form. And anyway, thank you guys for joining me. Thank you guys for watching. And until next time, take care of yourselves.